If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warmer from below! Welcome to Love You Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. We're going to be talking with him about what we're all seeing in terms of these NBA draft decisions, which ones are of the biggest impact. We're also going to be talking about the SEC in general, just the balance of power out there, how some of these teams could go from the bottom to the top of the SEC, the massive expectations that are involved in the SEC, and so much more. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Wednesday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letter CM, naming does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, we have everything powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they do such an amazing job making sure that bettors are able to access all their funds, and they make sure that you're able to, at all times, be able to utilize things for gambling-related transactions. When you go on over to edgeboost.bet, type in that promo code of Greg, Greg. That gives you a $1 for $1 match up to $25 on your first deposit. And now let's talk with our good friend Rob Donaldson. You're able to catch all of his work over at youtube.com/Rob Donaldson, and then on Twitter/X at RobDFB. And Rob, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And yeah, thank you for having me on the college basketball show throughout the summer months as well. And obviously coming up here in the middle of June, we have a big decision for a lot of key players that are kind of in the portal, maybe holding on to their current teams as well. And that comes down to whether or not they want to test the professional waters or stay in college and collect their NIL. And, I think it's just an interesting case study, if nothing else, and I'm excited to kind of watch how it plays out.
And what I think is very intriguing is that typically when a guy enters in the NBA draft but also makes their decision in terms of the transfer portal, 99.99999% of the time they actually go to that school. But Cedric Howard is an interesting guy. As far as I've seen, he's still in the NBA draft process. He really shot off the charts at the Combine over the last week or so, and I think that that's very much one to watch, because for Duke, I don't know where they go if they don't get Cedric Howard in the portal, because we know that they're going to be fine with the Bruiser brothers and company, but that's a good piece of experience that they'd be losing out on.
Yeah, especially when you lose so many pieces that Duke did lose. And what was kind of the benefit of Duke this past season is they were able to bring in a lot of new faces, obviously, who are extremely talented. Malawach, Cooper Flagg, and some other guys that filled up spots. But they also retained a lot of their veterans, and that's kind of what made them, I think, kind of stand out from the pack, from all these other teams that were just collecting talent. And it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep a guy who, wasn't on the roster last year, but would be filling such an important role for them. I think it would be beneficial for him to come back to college, especially with, it being Duke, with all the NIL opportunities. But, he's not alone. PJ Haggerty's going to be in that mix. RJ Lewis is going to be in that mix, and a number of other players as well.
Yep, and then I think that RJ Lewis is one of the most intriguing players out there as well, because we saw things ended for him when he was over at St. John's this past season. A guy that struggled a little bit from three-point range, but a guy that's able to just put the ball in the basket in general. I feel like he could use another year in college, and I think the big question is what he does when he returns to the college ranks, because I just don't see him saying pro.
Right. I think what actually helps a lot of these players, and I saw this firsthand as being an Iowa Hawkeye fan with guys like a Joe Wieskamp or a Peyton Sandfort or a CJ, Frederick, who went on to Kentucky actually after going to test the portal, is they get really good feedback and become more overall rounded players after they test the NBA waters. And they also kind of have a sense of realization of, where their value actually stacks up, much like, you and I kind of working in the workforce of, this job or whatever job coming up through our college years. You're kind of building up a resume, you're getting different input. And I think you can actually use that to leverage, whatever, program you end up or your next job potentially out in the basketball world.
Yep, no question about it, as we do have our good friend Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Soups. Those are a few intriguing ones, and we did see on Wednesday a bit of news as Devin McLaughlin is one from Tuesday, but he goes back to Vanderbilt. And I thought that Joshua Hubbard going back to Mississippi State was big as well, because with Mississippi State, I felt like they weren't necessarily quite themselves this past season because they didn't have the low post play of the likes of Tolu Smith and company, but Hubbard, he was that main scorer for them. He was really one of the lone guys that was a consistent scorer for them, and I thought that was one that they very badly needed, and they got it.
Yeah, and Mississippi State was such a weird program, or their trajectory of their season was very odd because they jumped out the gates extremely hot, and I think they confused or tricked a lot of people into thinking that they were kind of this high end of the SEC team, and then inevitably just kind of fell back to that middle of the pack where they've sort of almost lived over the past couple years here, and it is going to be one of those things of how do they take the next step. I think they are a much worse team without a Josh Hubbard in the mix. When they needed a bucket, he was the guy to get that bucket. And my goodness, there were some games where the entire buckets needed to be filled up by, Hubbard on that side of the ball. And so I 100% agree with you. Getting him back is such a big time piece. And it's going to be interesting to see, with an ever-evolving SEC, and obviously that's the conference that just kind of stole the show last year, won the championship, has a ton of NIL being imported. You even mentioned Vanderbilt, so a lot of these kind of lower-tier teams that were traditionally lower-tier teams in the SEC actually have a fair amount of investment. What happens to a team like a Mississippi State that isn't at the top of the NIL rankings and maybe isn't the most attractive destination for, these incoming freshmen or these incoming transfers? Where do they find their niche? I'm very excited to see it, but I do think they're well coached. And again, Hubbard's a great piece.
Yep, he is certainly a great piece. And then I mentioned it with Vanderbilt, the fact that they bring back Devin McLaughlin. And I like what they've done here in the offseason, bringing in a guy like Jalen Washington, A.K. Okereke. He's going to be coming on over from Cornell. That's a guy that I thought was intriguing. They've got likes of a Duke Dean. You go down the list. And for Vanderbilt, I really love what they did last season. They didn't have a lot of rebounding outside of McLaughlin. They've added that here in the offseason, and they just doubled down on a really good backcourt as well.
And Vanderbilt, what kind of, I think a lot of these teams get, I guess, certified or proven when it does come to those key moments in tournament play. And yes, they kind of got stuck with a very tough first round matchup in terms of the style component, but they're adding a lot of veteran players and a lot of sort of mishmashy, sort of versatile offensive scorers and defenders. And I really do think that if everything can kind of come together under Mark Byington, the way that we've seen him do it at James Madison, I really do think that Vanderbilt could be one of those teams that kind of surged near the top of the SEC, almost to the extent of, kind of an Oklahoma sneaking in as a 9 seed last year. I think somewhere in that type of mix is where they could stay. And honestly, out of that 9 seed, 8 seed spot, it just takes those 2 wins. And all of a sudden, you're potentially on a pathway inheriting the 1 seed line.
Yep, and man, this is a Vanderbilt team that I think is going to be a lot of fun to watch, to say the least, over the course of the next few months and see what they're going to be able to do to begin the season, because I think that they're a program with a lot of upside, as Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets, is joining me on Coast to Coast Soups. And I think that the entirety of the SEC is so intriguing because we did see a team in Florida 2 years ago go from being on the 7-10 game and losing that 7-10 game in a game where they gave up 100-plus points to winning the national title. And I just believe that with the way that the SEC has so many great coaches, the way that so many of these teams are dumping out their NIL money, that all 16 of these teams that are making great moves, all of them are going to be formidable. And I think that we could see an SEC where a lot of teams, they go from the bottom half to the top half of the conference. I think that there's going to be a lot of movement in the ranks this season.
I'm right there with you. And I think if we're kind of setting up this NIL and forecasting, what we have now 5 years prior, I think a lot of people would have kind of potentially thrown out there that, yeah, maybe the SEC is just going to rise up there because there's just a lot of money investment when you're talking about SEC and sports. And, with that, at the same time, although you might have a lot of these teams that make the tournament, just like last year, that is going to raise the expectations sooner rather than later for maybe these coaches that are in year 3, year 4, and are just kind of getting by, getting into the tournament, but not really doing anything. And so that's really going to be where I think the interesting portion kind of comes out of this is, if Porter Moser makes the tournament again, is that enough to keep his job? I'm starting to think probably not, because they're investing in NIL. If there's not a return on that investment, well, they're going to be going after some changes that are going to make that happen. And if it's not personnel, there's only one way up. And for that reason, I think we're going to see, a really high-end SEC, but potentially, even like just a very competitive middle ground and then a tournament field that could really be interesting for these coaches.
And bringing in Nigel Pack for Oklahoma, that should be raising the expectations as well. I thought that was a very rock-solid add, and I really like the coaching hires that we've seen here in the offseason as well, because with Texas A&M hiring out Bucky McMillan, it's something that's completely off the walls in terms of the SEC. You just don't see that sort of a style in general. I think that pans out, and then obviously with Mr. Sean Miller, he got relieved of his duties over at Arizona because of everything that we saw in DeAndre Ayton, which in this day and age, we laugh at a player like DeAndre Ayton only getting $100,000, and I think that he's now set up to be able to have a good run out there in the SEC too.
Yeah, he was always that one kind of coach that was just kind of the quote-unquote scumbaggy coach during the times of non-NIL, and that was just, modern-day practice, but actually at a very minimal scale. He's actually, what he was doing back then is what every mid-major program is currently doing, trying to keep their own talent in-house. And it's a very interesting kind of switching of the guard. Rick Pitino a little bit in that same boat, but he went off the reservation, I think, in terms of what the NIL allows nowadays. But yeah, to your point, when you are looking at the head coaches that they bring in, again, that just speaks to the investment of the entire conference top to bottom. There's no playing around. You can't just make the play-in game and feel good about your job position, because if all these donors are dumping millions and millions into the program, well, guess what? The program higher-ups are going to want to continue to see that investment, and if you can't show a return on that investment, like Sweet 16s, Elite 8s, well, your job is probably not secure, and I think that's a good right to be.
Yep, and I think that it is so funny to just take a look at what happened over with old Slick Rick Pitino, because that was money with benefits, if we're going to call it what it is. So good, clean family fun right there, as we do have Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's going to be right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I do think that it also brings up something very interesting with regards to these draft decisions, because we still do have a few that I think are going to be very, very impactful. And just when you take a look at the landscape, I certainly think that the biggest one is Milo Suzon. Are there a few other ones that you're watching out for? Because I do think that there's going to be some programs here that it's not going to be like make or break or anything like that, but a program like Houston, for them to be able to get back to the Final Four, get to a title game, I think that they need Uzan. And then there are a few other teams that it could be the difference maker of them perhaps making/missing the NCAA tournament.
What about just one of the bigger sort of transfer portal signings or transfer portal gets in this cycle with Yaxel Lendenborg? It obviously sounds like he's going to be very committed to Michigan, but all it takes is one coach saying, declare for the draft. Believe in me. We're going to draft you at this spot. And all of a sudden, that temptation of money that Michigan might not be able to match becomes almost like, do I want to pass this up? This was a guy that actually returned to UAB after his freshman year because of that potential of sort of rounding out his game and getting better for the NBA, this NBA draft cycle. And so, did that, improvement really come to fruition? Does he feel like he needs to go up another level to really round out and fully round out his game? Potentially. And I think a lot of guys like a Tay Davis, for example, that goes back, or, a Chris Howell from UC San Diego who's testing the waters. I think a lot of these players are kind of taking the same route as underclassmen, where they're just saying, hey, how can I really round up my game at a bigger stop this next season, rather than just kind of using my current resume to get it all done for me.
And then I think another very interesting one, we were talking about the SEC. It feels like they've got all of them right now. And Todd Pettiford, whether or not he goes back to Auburn, I think is so instrumental for them because we know that G&I Broom is gone. And for G&I Broom, congratulations on the credit card vertical over at the NBA Draft Combine. That was good fun. That was hilarious to say the least. But that said, with regards to Todd Pettiford, a little bit more than a credit card vertical, I think that he could be able to make people a lot of money with their credit cards if he returns to school.
Right. He's a great example. Tega Owe is a great example of a guy who probably comes back to school, but is still testing those NBA waters and is athletic enough that, again, it just takes... I always wonder, who's in the corner of these players. Obviously you can't kind of sign on with an agent or I guess nowadays maybe you can with, and I'm kind of unclear on that rule set, but, I always wonder who's in the corner of these players making this NBA draft decision because there are going to be selfish NBA front offices out there that are saying, yeah, come on, we're going to get you at pick number 22. And then all of a sudden they trade up in the draft and they're no longer at pick 22, or a player falls to them that they didn't expect to be there and they're taking that player over you and you're just kind of left hanging. I really do wonder and hope that these players make the correct decision, especially with NIL. I think it does balance the playing field where if you go back to school and it's kind of a 50-50 decision, you can still make money playing basketball, but you nailed it. Tyrese Proctor is another example that's out there. I have no idea. Bruce Thornton, a number of players that could really benefit from another year or just make money, good money in college basketball. And I really do hope some of these players actually do kind of keep that thought on the forefront.
Yep, and then I look at this guy as well, PJ Haggerty, because he committed to playing over at NC State with Will Wade and company, but he's currently in the NBA draft process as well, and I think that that's another notable player that I am sure. Could he be able to get drafted? I think so, but I feel like he could level up his game by showing a little bit more versatility, and going to Will Wade, that he's going to be making quite a bit of money out there in college if he decides to stay as well.
A lot of these players that are going to high major basketball from the mid-major level are going to see a drastically different way of life, right? They're going to have the money to go blow it at McDonald's if they want after every single day, or the Chop House, or your favorite Texas Roadhouse and grab a bunch of rolls. It's different. You're going to have the ability to buy cool vehicles and kind of have that free up for your family. And you can do that while in college, still getting paid maybe for 2, 3, 4 even years if this year of eligibility passes for some of these guys. I just kind of, again, build up your resume, make money as long as you can in the game of basketball, because the NBA is never a sure thing, even if you get drafted. And for a lot of these players, that is going to be the case of an early flameout in the NBA if they decide to jump ship.
I can't think of anything better than being a big man on campus, being able to go to Texas Roadhouse every day. That is a dream come true right there. Even if you're passing up a little bit of NBA money, give me that experience right there. And always give me the experience of having you aboard, Rob. You do such an incredible job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. Obviously doing a great job this time of year, taking a look at baseball too. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and other people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Hey, Greg, it's always a pleasure to hop on, man. And, for those who are wanting to follow my bets in every sport, along with college basketball when that comes back into season, you can do so on my Twitter/X page at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
It's always great to be able to get Rob aboard. Every single time he joins me, lends such great insights. Does not bring the rules from Texas Roadhouse, but he brings everything else. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Joey Chama, he was over at San Diego this last season. He was averaging about 6.5 points per contest, a little bit over an assist half per game. He has decided that he is going to be going to Arkansas State, very much a new-look Arkansas team after what we saw a season ago. Career about 38.5% three-point shooter, by the way, so he's a relatively good guy there, but for Arkansas State, without question, this is a new-look team, to say the least, as for Arkansas State, you've got a bunch that is no longer led by Brian Hodgson. He takes the job in the offseason over at South Florida, but you know what? You bring in quite a few guys I think are going to be rock solid for this team, as they've got Jalen Hampton, who comes on over from Missouri State, Chandler Jackson, who is over at Florida State. I'd feel this as a little bit more of a depth piece than anything else, being able to add in a nice sharpshooter like this, but TJ Caldwell coming over from Ole Miss. Now you've got someone that's able to knock down a few threes, so I do like the way that things are coming together for Arkansas State. Should be pretty formidable out there in the Sun Belt. I think that this team is going to be pretty interesting to watch, to say the least, as well. So you've got a Kansas State team that they are picking up quite a few pieces via the transfer portal, and it didn't work out for them last offseason in the transfer portal, but now you bring in the big man, Marcus Johnson, who he was over at Bowling Green this last season, 16 points, 5 boards per contest, mid-30s three-point shooter, and he's going to be able to give this team some good versatility in general. Now, not necessarily the most nimble guy in the world, as he stands 6'7". He's like a Glenn Big Baby Davis 2.0, even though he does a little bit less on the glass, does a little bit more in terms of being able to space the floor, but I think that this is a very fascinating pickup for them. As for Kansas State, they've done a solid job last few off seasons of being able to add talent, and first time around it worked out very, very well. Last 2 off seasons, not so much, but that said, you know what? You've got a guy in Abdi Bashir who was able to give you 20 plus points per contest, and they really added all mid-major guys other than Tariq Smith, who was over at Memphis last season, and he didn't even see a ton of minutes. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how this blend works, and we'll see if Kansas State jumps in on some of these guys that decide to come back after they were in the NBA draft, and now they're going to be entering in the transfer portal. So I think that is going to be very much worth watching. You've got Cam Martin, who last season, he was over at Long Beach State. He was able to average 8.5 points, a steal per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Sam Amford. Samford going to be looking very different without Bucky McMillan out there, but with Martin, he was able to be one of the better three-point shooters out there in the Big West. He was shooting about 34.5% from three-point range at 6'4". He's got a little bit of size to be able to space the floor, what have you. He plays some okay defense. He was one of the few guys for Long Beach State that was able to give you a bit of a defensive effort, so I do think that he's going to be able to go in right away, do a solid job for a Samford team that's going to be in quite a bit of transition this season, and this bunch, they're going to have quite a bit of transition as well as Campbell. They are bringing in Sacred Arts' Amari Stewart. He last season was able to average 12.5 points, right around 5 boards, 3 assists, steal and a half per contest. I do like this pickup for them. As for Campbell, they have really done a nice job of being able to upgrade this roster, as you've got 100 billion guys who are coming in by the transfer portal, and I mean, they bring in him as he was able to give the team 12.5 points per contest. That's another double-figure score for them. Quentin Mincy was another guy that was very rock solid for them. Chris Fields, who comes in for Norfolk State, he's going to be able to give a bit of size. And Jeremiah Johnson, he's a former top 350 recruit, comes in after just doing a big giant nothing burger over at UW Green Bay this last season. But for Stewart, shot in the neighborhood about 30% from three-point range. You'd like to see that be a little bit higher, but overall, I do think that this Campbell team is starting to get a lot of talent, especially with the fact that just off meter, who's able to average about 12 points per contest, he might be heading over there as well. Just took an interesting visit, so we're going to see if Campbell is perhaps not done yet. You got DJ turned up Stewart, who decided that he was going to decommit from Mercer. He was going to be going there, was averaging about 9 points, 3 assists per contest over at Robert Morris, so he's back into the transfer portal. We shall see what is going to be happening with his recruitment. And you got Austin Ball. He was last season just glued to the bench over at George Mason. He was going to be heading to IU Indy Kansas coach, so now he's heading out over to Eastern Kentucky. Guy that averaged about 2.5 points per contest 2 seasons ago. 6'7", a little bit of a wing player. Should be able to help out Eastern Kentucky with regards to their overall versatility, so I do like this pickup for them. I do like this pickup as well, as you've got a guy in Britt Harris, who he was going to be going to Pacific. He has decided that he is going to be going to Florida International instead, and for Florida International, they're getting a guy that shot 37.5% from three-point range, 11.5 points per game. Florida International was one of the more shall we say, rough three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. And the big thing for Florida National, they just have to be able to create depth because they've had a roster over the last few seasons that have been built around one or two guys. Jaden Brewer was trying to do a little bit of everything this past season, so do have to have your question marks as to how things are going to be spaced out in general, because I look at Swati Jackson coming in. He was a 20-point-per-game scorer over at West Georgia 2 seasons ago. He's able to take over the game. Julian Mackey, he's a double-figure scorer over at Houston Christian. Corey Stevenson, he's able to give you some boards. He's able to give you some points. So I do like what these guys are able to bring to the table, and we shall see what they're going to be able to do moving forward, and we shall see what this team is going to be doing moving forward as well. As you've got David Simon going on over to Vermont. He last season was over at San Diego, was able to average about 5 points per contest, and for Vermont, a team that really hasn't done a lot in the transfer portal last few off seasons, they had in there a double-figure scorer in Ben Johnson, which I like. You've also been able to bring in Chris Kumezka. He was over at Loyola, Maryland. He was able to be a relatively solid player for them as well. And I just take a look at this Vermont team, just being able to add a few guys, be able to revamp this roster in general. I think that this is a good thing for them, even though they don't necessarily have that one guy that's like super-duper dominant or anything like that. Ben Michaels, when he was over at Buffalo, was able to give you a few rebounds, but just being able to bring in there some fresh faces, guys that are a little bit more defense-oriented, I think is going to be able to help them out. And Trey Woodyard, who came on over from New Hampshire, he's a guy that I really like as well. So I do think that Vermont has been able to do a really good job of being able to add some pieces, and I think that they're going to be fun to watch moving forward. And you've got Jaden Mott. He was last season over at Northern Illinois. Wasn't able to give you too much. He was able to average about 2.5 points, 2 rebounds per contest. He's decided that he is going to be going on over to Central Connecticut. And for Central Connecticut, they do lose a lot of that core from a season ago that was so good, that was able to be at top of the NEC. Obviously, they fell a little bit short from there, but you know what? They've got a few pieces that are going to be coming in, as they've also got Gabe Spinelli, who was over at Chicago State. He was a nice versatile guard over at Chicago State, so I think that that's going to be a fun team to watch out there in the NEC after all the inroads that they were able to build last season. You've got Cal State Bakersfield, meep, the Roadrunners guard, Marvin McGee, has decided that he's going to be heading on over to UC Santa Barbara. Good pickup for Santa Barbara. They brought in Ada Mahaney this offseason as well. McGee last season, 10 points per contest, about 3.5 rebounds per game, so he's been able to give a little bit of versatility for McGee. A solid three-point shooter, not necessarily a guy that's going to completely light you up from three-point range, but for UC Santa Barbara after the last few seasons have been, quite frankly, very disappointing for them. I do think that they're going to be looking to be able to just build things up in general. For McGee, last year shot only about 32.5% from three, but for his career, it's more around about 35.5% three-point shooter. And for the Santa Barbara unit, I do think that it's going to be very interesting to see how they operate in general, because last season they were a pretty rock-solid rebound rate team. They were a little bit hit or miss with regards to that backcourt. Now they've been able to bring in some guys to be able to really revamp this backcourt. As I was mentioning, Ada Mahaney's going to be coming in there. Mario Little, who was over at Utah, he's going to be very rock-solid. And with McGee, he's got good 6'6" size as well. So I think that they've done a good job in the offseason just being able to build a little bit of depth and be able to bring in some good top-flight talent in general. Zurich Nutter, he was over at Georgia State this last season, and he was able to do a nice job, give the team 14 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, some relatively good versatility. He's decided that he is going to be going to Fordham, man. Fordham, my goodness. You've got so many guys that are going to be entering into this program, and I'm really interested to see how Fordham's going to do, because I like Mike Maipio as a coach, and I think that he's building this program right. Bringing in DeJure Reeves, a double-figure score over from Iona. You've had Lewis Lesman come in, Akira Jacobs, who was over at Hawaii as well. So I just take a look at this team, even though they didn't have a lot of the Mike Pio guys come on over from UC Riverside. I think that they right away are going to be able to hit the ground running. Marcus Green, Christian Henry, guys like this, they've got a really good backcourt. Leave something to be desired in terms of posts, but Nutter, for being 6'6", is a relatively good rebounder. So I think that they've got a lot of nice pieces out there, and this is a solid piece, as you've got Darius Robinson deciding that he's going to go to SIU Edwardsville. He last season was over at Oral Roberts, averaged about 7.5 points per contest. Not a guy that really plays a lot of defense, because nobody over at Oral Roberts does, but was able to shoot about 33% from three-point range. And for Edwardsville, they just really haven't gotten on the board for too many transfers here in the offseason, so just being able to see 1 or 2 go through, I think that that's going to be very big for them. And with this SIU Edwardsville team, I think that's going to be very fascinating to see how they build up from a season ago, because last year they were able to do a nice job, be able to make their first NCAA tournament, and this offseason, they just have not been able to really get a lot of guys in via the portal. So I'm very curious to see what's going to be happening on this front, and we're going to see if they're going to be able to add a few more guys, because I do think that they need to. They don't have a lot of depth as of right now, and this team is looking to be able to build a little bit of depth as well as Hofstra. They're bringing in James Patterson. He last season was limited to 15 games, 9.5 points, 6 boards per contest. I do think that he's going to be able to make a nice impact for this Hofstra team. That's why he's been a little bit rough on the glass. For Hofstra, they do a nice job in terms of their backcourt. The front court always leaves a little bit of something to be desired. They've brought in Josh Reeves as well from UIC, Illinois, Chicago. He was a nice, solid shooter for them, and A.J. Willis was a good three-point shooter over at Wyoming. So they've done a great job on that front. They're probably going to need a little bit more ball handling, but they've been able to get things zoned down in terms of being able to give a little bit more rebounding and being able to have a bit more size in general. And this team is going to be able to just do a better job in general, be able to provide that size with Central Michigan, bringing in Armani Mighty. He was over at Mercer last season, just did not really see the floor too much. I know that he signed with a few different teams in the last few off seasons, so being able to bring him in for Central Michigan, I think it's going to be rock solid after they were hit or miss on the glass. And then Deuce Turner down for what? He was over at UC Santa Barbara this last season, 9.5 points, a little bit over a steal per contest, shot 37.5% from three-point range 2 seasons ago. He's been very well traveled in terms of the West Coast. Now he's going to be heading out east to a Fairfield team that they just did not have anything in that backcourt last season. And for Fairfield, I think that this team does have a lot of upside. For Fairfield, they haven't necessarily signed a bunch of guys here in the offseason, but this is very much a step in the right direction for them. They've also got Cam Estefes, who was on the bench for Rhode Island last season. I think that he's going to be able to come in, give you a bit of versatility, and with Deuce Turner, probably going to be running a lot of offense around him. And in terms of NBA draft decisions, you saw Joshua Hubbard, who last season he was over at Mississippi State, mid-30s three-point shooter, 19 points per contest. He has decided that he is going to be returning to school. He is not in the transfer portal, so he's going to be going back to Mississippi State. This is a very good pickup for them, because for Mississippi State, if they did not have him back, you didn't know what they were going to be quite doing. And for Mississippi State, they've done a solid job of being able to retool here in the transfer portal in the offseason, and I think that this bunch is going to be well in line to be able to make it back to the NCAA tournament last season. They were lacking a little bit more size than what they were used to, but for Mississippi State, they've done a nice job bringing in Akuru, who's got a lot of versatility. He was over at Kansas State last season. Then I feel like the pickup of Jaden Epps is going to be able to help in that backcourt as well. So I think that that was a very big move for them. This was also a pretty solid announcement, as well as you got Melvin Council is going to be returning on over to school. For Melvin Council, he was over at St. Bonaventure this last year, 14.5 points per contest. Very good versatility. He's going to be going to Kansas, and for Kansas, very interesting that they really didn't add a lot of splashy guys, a lot of power conference guys. They went a little bit more of the mid-major route. Being able to bring in a guy like a Melvin Council is just able to stuff the stat sheet in general. I think is going to be very important, and it's going to be very good for them. So I do like that pickup. And what else I love is just taking a look at this great game every single day on this podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Seeps, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters M, maybe does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Otherwise, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks to Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bets show for joining me in the last segment. And I'm coming at you guys every single day throughout the year on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.